My son-in-law didn't just disrespect my daughter at her own graduation party. He announced it like it was something to be proud of. I still remember exactly where I was standing when it happened, by the window near the back of the room, holding a glass of iced tea I hadn't touched, watching the way my daughter laughed a little too quickly whenever her fiancé's father told a joke. She had that look she always got when she was trying too hard, chin slightly lifted, smile a half second behind her eyes. I recognized it because I'd seen it on her face ever since she started dating Marcus, and I'd spent the better part of 2 years telling myself I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining things. My daughter's name is Claire. She was 26 years old that evening, standing in the living room of her soon-to-be in-law's house in a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She had just received her master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Michigan, 5 years of work, 2 of which she completed while holding down a part-time job because I could only help with so much, and she refused to ask for more. She was the first person in our family to earn a graduate degree. Her mother, God rest her soul, would have wept. The party had been Marcus's mother's idea. Patricia hosted it at their house in Bloomfield Hills, big colonial, 3-car garage, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns all look like they're cut with scissors. I drove up from Columbus for it. I told myself I was going because Claire wanted me there, and that was true. But if I'm being honest, I also went because something in my gut had been unsettled for months, and I wanted to see for myself. Marcus's father, Gerald, was the kind of man who filled every room he walked into. Not because of his personality necessarily, but because of his voice. It was the voice of a man who had never once in his 63 years been told to lower it. He was a real estate developer, semi-retired, and he spoke about everything, traffic, wine, the weather, with the same authority he probably used in boardrooms. I shook his hand when I arrived. He called me buddy. I am nobody's buddy. The evening started pleasantly enough. There was catered food, a cake with Claire's name on it, a slideshow Patricia had put together of photos from Claire's childhood that made me have to set my glass down and breathe through my nose for a moment. Claire was glowing. She kept close to Marcus, and Marcus was attentive in the way that young men are when they're performing for an audience. He refilled her drink. He had his hand on her back. He introduced her to people using the phrase, my fiancé, the engineer, and she always laughed a little when he said it, like it was a joke she didn't quite understand. It was Gerald who made the toast. He stood up near the fireplace, clinked his glass, waited until the room settled. About 30 people there, colleagues of his, a few of Marcus's friends, my sister who had also driven up, Claire's 2 friends from her program. Gerald looked around the room with the satisfaction of a man surveying something he owned, and then he smiled at Claire. "We are so proud," he said, "of this young woman. She has worked hard. She's smart. She's driven." He paused for effect. Of course, after the wedding, all of that ambition is going to go into being a wonderful wife and mother, so I suppose this degree is really just a very expensive piece of paper. He laughed. A few people in the room laughed with him, the reflexive kind, the kind that means nothing except that they weren't sure what else to do. Marcus laughed. It was a short laugh, bright and unconcerned, like what his father had said was merely a light observation about the weather. Claire did not laugh. She blinked once, and then she smiled, and it was the worst smile I had ever seen on her face because it had nothing behind it. She raised her glass. "Thank you, Gerald," she said, in a voice so carefully neutral it made my chest ache. I did not say anything. I stood by that window and I watched my daughter fold herself smaller, and I made a decision. I want to be honest about something here, because I've replayed that evening 1,000 times, and sometimes the question I ask myself is why I didn't stand up right then and say something. Why I didn't put my glass down and walk across that room and explain to Gerald, in the plainest possible terms, what I thought of his toast. And the answer is complicated. Part of it was Claire. I knew my daughter, and I knew that if I had made a scene that night, she would have been mortified. She would have apologized to Patricia. She would have spent the drive home reassuring Marcus that her father was just protective, just old-fashioned, just overreacting. She would have done all of that labor to smooth over what I'd done, and none of it would have addressed the actual problem. The actual problem was not Gerald's toast. The actual problem was that Marcus had laughed. And part of it was that I already had a plan. Not a fully formed plan, not yet, but I'd been doing something quietly for about 8 months by the time of that party. And after that evening, I understood with complete clarity that I needed to keep doing it, and do it faster. Let me back up. Claire had been with Marcus for 3 years before the engagement. I had concerns almost from the beginning, but concerns are not evidence, and I am not the kind of father who mistakes his own preferences for facts. I watched, I listened, I paid attention to the small things, the way Claire changed her order at a restaurant after Marcus raised an eyebrow at what she'd chosen, the way she stopped mentioning her promotion at work in conversations when he was present, the way she once started to tell me something on the phone and then said, "Actually, never mind, it's fine." And when I asked her what she meant, she said Marcus was home. I said nothing to her about any of this. I was afraid of pushing her away. That is the particular terror of a parent in this situation. You know that if you say the wrong thing, you become the enemy, and then you lose your access to the person you're trying to protect. What I did instead was save money. I am a retired mechanical engineer. I spent 31 years with a manufacturing company in Columbus. I have a pension. I'm careful. After Claire's mother passed, I sold the family home and bought a smaller place outright, which freed up a considerable amount. I had been keeping it in a money market account, thinking vaguely that it was Claire's someday, a cushion for whatever she needed. After the first time I watched Marcus speak to her in a voice that made her go very still and very quiet, we were at dinner. She had suggested a movie, and he'd looked at her and said, "I already told you I don't want to do that." Claire with a patience that was somehow worse than anger after that dinner. I stopped thinking vaguely. I called a real estate attorney in the Ann Arbor area, a woman named Susan who had been recommended to me by a colleague. I explained my situation. She was not surprised. She told me that what I wanted to do was entirely possible and walked me through exactly how to structure it so that the asset would be protected in Claire's name only, with legal language ensuring it could not be transferred, leveraged, or claimed by a spouse in the event of a divorce or any legal proceeding. It would be hers alone. She would have to take deliberate, independent action to ever change that, and the documentation would make any attempt to pressure her into doing so legally complicated. I found a 2-bedroom condominium in Ann Arbor, 12 minutes from the engineering firm where Claire worked. It was on the 3rd floor of a well-maintained building, with a parking garage and a management office that handled maintenance. It was not fancy. It was safe, it was private, and it was in her name. I closed on it in February. I did not tell Claire. I also did not tell Claire about the conversation I had with Susan in March, after Claire called me crying for the first time. She didn't tell me why she was crying. She said she was just tired. I listened for 40 minutes and I said, carefully, "You know you can always come home, sweetheart. You know that, right?" She said she knew. She said everything was fine. After I hung up the phone that night, I called Susan and told her to prepare a document, a clean, simple summary of the property, the account I had set up to cover the first 2 years of condo fees, and the legal protections attached. Something Claire could read in 5 minutes and understand completely. Susan asked me if I had talked to Claire directly about my concerns. I told her I had tried, and that Claire wasn't ready. Susan paused and then said something I have thought about many times since. The most important thing you can do right now is make sure she has a door. Whether she walks through it is up to her, but she has to know the door is there. I kept that in mind. The months between that February and the following September, when everything finally broke open, were the longest of my life. I visited when I could. I watched. Marcus was not the kind of man who was loud about his control. He was precise about it. He monitored what Claire spent. He made comments about her clothes, her friends, her choices at work. He was charming to everyone else. He was the kind of man that people describe as such a great guy because they've never been alone with him when he's decided someone needs to be corrected. I know that type. I grew up around that type. My father was a decent man, but his brother was not. And I watched what it did to my aunt over 30 years. I watched her get smaller and quieter and more apologetic until eventually she disappeared into the background of her own life. And nobody who knew her before would have recognized who she became. I was 12 years old when I decided I would never allow that to happen to anyone in my family. I just didn't expect to be 63 and still fighting it. The break came in September. I was home on a Sunday evening when my phone rang. It was Claire. Her voice was different from any version of it I had heard before, not crying, not afraid exactly, but stripped of everything soft, flat and clear, like a person reading from a document. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." I sat down. I said, "Okay," she told me. Not everything. I don't think she even knew everything herself. Or rather, she had been managing it so carefully for so long that she no longer had clear edges around it. But she told me enough. She told me that Marcus had gone through her phone while she was sleeping and read her messages to her colleague Daniel, who was a friend and nothing more, and that when she woke up, he was standing at the foot of the bed in the dark, waiting for her to open her eyes. She told me that he had taken her car keys that morning and told her she didn't need to go anywhere today. She told me that she had been sitting in the bathroom for an hour, waiting for him to fall asleep in the other room before she called me. I asked her one question. I said, "Are you in any immediate danger right now?" She said no. She said he wasn't like that. I have learned since then that he isn't like that is something people say in a very specific situation, and it is almost never the whole truth. But I didn't push it. I had the plan. I said, "Claire, I need you to listen to me now. I'm going to tell you something and I need you to believe me." I told her about the condo. I told her the address. I told her it was in her name, paid for, protected, and ready. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She said, "What?" I said, "You have a door. I want you to know the door is there. You don't have to walk through it tonight if you're not ready. But it is there, and it is yours, and nobody can take it from you." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked how long I'd had it. I told her. She started crying, but not the way she'd cried before, not the tired kind, not the everything is fine kind. It was the kind of crying that sounds like something releasing. I sat on the other end of the phone and I let her. I was in my car heading north on I-71 within 30 minutes of hanging up. She texted me when Marcus had gone to sleep, gave me the all clear. I parked a block away and waited, the way I used to wait for her outside school when she was little and had forgotten to tell me what time pickup was. At 2 in the morning, she came out the front door of their apartment building with one bag on her shoulder and her work laptop under her arm, walking so quietly I didn't hear her feet on the sidewalk. She got in the car. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't take anything that was his." I told her that was smart. She said, "I left my ring on the kitchen counter." I said, "That's yours too, but whatever you decide." We drove to the condo. I had the keys in an envelope in my glove compartment. She stood in the middle of the empty living room, bare floors, fresh paint, nothing in it yet, and she turned in a slow circle, looking at the walls. "This is mine," she said. I said yes. She sat down on the floor and I sat down next to her, like we used to do when she was little and we'd spread blankets out for movie nights. We didn't talk very much. Around 4 in the morning, she put her head on my shoulder and fell asleep, and I stayed still and let her. The next part took a few weeks. Marcus called. I did not answer. He showed up at my sister's house in Ann Arbor looking for Claire because he'd gone through her contacts, and my sister was the only Ann Arbor address he had. My sister, who is a retired schoolteacher with the patience of stone and the spine of a woman who raised 4 children alone, opened the door, looked at him, and said, "She doesn't want to speak to you, and neither do I." Then she closed the door. I have never loved my sister more than I did when she called to tell me that. Gerald called me. That surprised me, actually. He used his boardroom voice. He said that this situation was becoming embarrassing for the family and that surely we could handle it like adults. I told him, very calmly, that I agreed things should be handled like adults, which was why my daughter had retained a family law attorney and would be in touch through proper channels. He started to say something about the engagement, and I thanked him for calling and ended the call. Patricia sent Claire a card. I don't know what it said. Claire didn't tell me, and I didn't ask. The attorneys sorted the engagement out in about 6 weeks. There was no marriage, so there was very little to sort. Marcus hired someone aggressive and expensive, who spent 3 weeks suggesting that Claire's reasons for leaving were exaggerated or fabricated. Claire's attorney, who came recommended by Susan, had been doing family law in Michigan for 22 years and had heard every version of that argument. She was unmoved. Marcus eventually agreed to the separation quietly, the way men like that usually do when they realize that fighting loudly creates a public record. Claire moved properly into the condo in October. She bought a couch. She adopted a cat she named Marcy, which I suspect was either a coincidence or a private joke I chose not to investigate. She went back to work at the firm and told me later that the week she came back, her colleague Daniel brought her a plant to her desk and asked if she was okay, and that she had actually been able to answer him honestly which was something she realized she hadn't been able to do in years. I drove up in November to help her put furniture together. We built a bookshelf from one of those flat pack kits, the kind that takes 3 hours and comes with instructions designed by someone who genuinely dislikes human beings. We had a disagreement about which direction one of the panels was supposed to face. She was right. I acknowledged that I was wrong, which is something I've been working on. That evening we ordered pizza and sat on her new couch, and she told me more about the last 2 years than I had known before. Not all of it, but more. I listened. I did not tell her I had seen it coming. I did not say I told you so, because I hadn't told her anything. I had simply built a door and waited. And that is not the same thing as wisdom. It is just what you do when you love someone who isn't ready yet, she said. At some point, I keep thinking about that toast at my graduation party and how I just stood there and smiled. I told her I remembered. She said, I was so angry. I didn't let myself feel it until now, but I was so angry. I had just finished 5 years of work. I had a 3.9 gigapascals. I had turned down a job offer in Denver to stay closer to you and him. And he stood up in front of everyone and called my degree an expensive piece of paper. I told her I remembered that too. She looked at me. Why didn't you say anything? I thought about how to answer that. I said, because anything I said that night would have been about me, and this needed to be about you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you were already planning it by then, weren't you? The condo. I said yes. She looked at the ceiling for a second. Then she said, Dad. Just that. Just my name, the way she's called me since she was 4 years old, and it meant everything. I told her I would always build her a door. That was my job. Whether she walked through it was always going to be hers. She said, I walked through it. I said I knew. What happened the following spring, 6 months after she moved in, was something I had not planned for, but which felt like a kind of completing. Gerald called Claire directly, which she had not been expecting. He had apparently been doing some reflection, or possibly he'd been advised to by someone wiser than him. He asked if she would be willing to talk. Claire told me about the call and asked what I thought. I told her that was entirely her decision, and that I would support whatever she chose. She agreed to a coffee, on her terms, at a cafe she picked, with a time limit she set. She told me afterward that Gerald had been stiff and clearly uncomfortable, but that he had apologized, not a full accounting, not the specific words she would have written for him, but a real apology, with eye contact. He said he had said something thoughtless and cruel at a moment that should have been a celebration, and that he was sorry for it. Claire thanked him, finished her coffee, and left. She called me from the parking lot. How do you feel? I asked. She said, like I don't need anything from him anymore, which I think is the best possible way to feel. I told her that sounded right. She asked me if I wanted to come up that weekend. She said she'd found a new hiking trail, and Marcy had learned to knock things off shelves deliberately as a form of protest, and she had made a large batch of soup that she couldn't finish alone. I told her I would be there Saturday morning. I want to say something now, not for her, but for whoever might be in the position I was in, watching someone you love diminish, not sure whether to act or wait or speak or stay quiet. I am not a wise man. I am a mechanical engineer from Columbus who reads too much and sleeps too little and spent most of his daughter's childhood worried he wasn't doing it right. But I know this. There is a specific kind of helplessness that comes with loving an adult who is in a situation they are not yet ready to leave. You cannot pull them out. You cannot argue them out. You cannot love them out on a timeline you control. What you can do, the one concrete, lasting thing you can do, is make sure they have somewhere to go when they're ready. Make the exit real, make it safe, make it theirs, build the door. You may wait longer than you want to. You may watch things happen that you cannot stop, and it will cost you sleep and appetite and more gray hair than you'd prefer. But if the door is there solid, real, undeniable, then when the person you love finally reaches for it, it will open. Claire called me last week to tell me she's been asked to lead a new infrastructure project at the firm, the largest scope she's been given. She was trying to be calm about it on the phone, but I could hear the real thing underneath the sound she used to make as a little girl when she'd finished reading a book she loved and couldn't quite believe it was over. That mix of satisfaction and brightness. I told her I was proud of her. She said, I know, Dad. I know you are. And she does. That's the thing she knows now that she didn't fully know 2 years ago, not because I told her, not because I reminded her, but because I showed her, in the only language that holds, the language of action, taken quietly and consistently over time, without expectation of credit or acknowledgement, because some things you do simply because they need to be done, and she is your daughter, and you are her father, and that is what that means. The bookshelf we built is still standing, by the way. Panel facing the right direction and everything. I checked.